They call it escape-proof. A fortress carved out of Colorado's desert, where concrete meets silence and silence breaks men. Yet even here, behind 12-inch steel doors and motion sensors that never sleep, some inmates still dream of freedom. And for a few, that dream became an obsession. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell. Because today you'll see what happens when the world's most dangerous prisoners try to outsmart the most secure prison ever built, ADX Florence. ADX Florence. A name whispered in every high-security prison across America. The Alcatraz of the Rockies. Built to hold the men other prisons couldn't control, terrorists, cartel bosses, serial killers, and traitors. It was designed to be the end of the line. A place where the walls don't just confine you, they erase you. Each cell is a concrete tomb. 12 feet long. 7 feet wide. A steel bed, a concrete desk, a shower controlled by the guards, and a slit window so narrow you can't tell if it's day or night. Inmates spend 23 hours a day inside. 1 hour of recreation, alone in a small concrete yard, surrounded by 20-foot walls topped with razor wire. There's no contact. No sunlight. No escape. Yet, deep inside those walls, something happens to the human mind. When you take away everything, sound, touch, light, and time, the brain starts to look for cracks. Not just in the walls, but in the system itself. Over the years, a few men dared to test those cracks. Some whispered through air vents, plotting impossible routes. Some studied guard routines for months, counting footsteps and electric hums. Others used smuggled metal, spoons, and even sharpened toothbrushes, not to fight, but to saw through hope itself. The Bureau of Prisons calls ADX escape-proof. But behind that confidence is fear, because history has shown one truth over and over again. There's no such thing as a perfect cage. It's the human urge to escape. It doesn't die, it evolves. And even the most dangerous men in America still chase that one impossible moment, when the door opens and the world beyond the walls becomes real again. Inside ADX Florence, escape isn't just forbidden, it's unthinkable. The perimeter is layered like an onion. Motion sensors, laser tripwires, pressure pads, towers armed with rifles, and a quick response team trained for any breach. Even if someone made it past their cell, they'd still face electronically sealed corridors, steel gates, and the open desert for miles. No cover, no road, no chance. But what the architects never accounted for was obsession. Because obsession doesn't care about logic. It doesn't see walls. It sees opportunities. One inmate hid tiny pieces of metal inside his mattress, spending months filing down the ventilation grate. Another learned how to jam his door's locking mechanism using a toothbrush and foil from his food tray. And then there was one, a name that still echoes in the Bureau's files. Silva Gonsalves. In 2009, Gonsalves tried what everyone said was impossible. With a small piece of sharpened steel, smuggled in through the laundry system, he began sawing through the vent in his cell. Night after night. Cutting. Scraping. Waiting for the sound of footsteps to fade. He was almost through when the guards caught him. The alarm went off. And for a few minutes, ADX Florence, the fortress of silence, erupted in chaos. The investigation that followed revealed a chilling truth. The system had failed not because of weakness but because of predictability. The same routines, the same timing, the same human complacency, repeated every single day. And that's all it takes for an inmate with patience to find a way to test the system. Even though every attempt has failed, the message is clear. ADX Florence may be escape-proof on paper. But in reality, it's a constant war between technology and the human will. And in that war, it's never truly over. He was known as the man who couldn't be caged. A name whispered in guard towers and inmate whispers alike. Richard Lee McNair. A small-town criminal turned escape legend. A man who proved that even the tightest locks could be picked, if you were clever enough. McNair's story begins long before ADX Florence. Before the concrete labyrinth. Before the cameras that blink red through the night. In 1987 in North Dakota, McNair tried to rob a grain elevator. The plan went bad. A worker was shot and killed. McNair was caught, sentenced to life without parole. But from day one he decided he wasn't staying. His first escape was pure desperation, slipping out of handcuffs with a small tube of lip balm. The second? Genius. In 1992, inside a state prison, McNair crawled through an air duct like something out of a movie. He was caught again. But instead of giving up, he got smarter. Every capture became a lesson. Every mistake, a blueprint for the next escape. And then came 2006. McNair was assigned to work in the prison's mailroom. Day after day he packed mailbags, thick canvas sacks used for transporting outgoing packages. No one thought twice about him. He was quiet, polite, always smiling. But what no one knew was that McNair was planning the most daring breakout in U.S. prison history. He built a secret compartment inside a stack of mailbags, just big enough for his body. He climbed in, zipped it shut from the inside, and waited. Hours later, the pallets of mailbags were loaded onto a truck heading out of the prison gates. No alarms. No cameras. No suspicion. He was gone. When workers opened the pallets hundreds of miles away, the bag was empty. Inside, all they found was a note. "Thanks for the ride." McNair was free for 18 months, traveling across the country under fake names, sleeping in motels, and even chatting with police during a traffic stop. He was calm, charming, completely unreadable. But the law finally caught up to him in 2007, after a sharp-eyed officer recognized him in Louisiana. When he arrived at ADX Florence, guards didn't see an inmate. They saw a legend, a man who made every system look foolish. And that's exactly why the Bureau of Prisons sent him there. ADX was built to stop men like McNair. No mailroom jobs. No ductwork. No movement without escort. Every item scanned, every step tracked, every breath monitored. They stripped away everything that made his previous escapes possible. No tools. No blind spots. No human error. Here, McNair's mind had nowhere left to run. In an interview years later, a former ADX officer said, "McNair walked in smiling. But when that door closed, the smile didn't last long. For the first time in his life, he couldn't find a weakness. The vents were reinforced. The air system sealed. Every bolt numbered and logged. Even the staff rotation schedule changed weekly, just in case someone like him was watching. Still, inside that cell, the same thoughts haunted him. Every creak. Every sound. Was it opportunity, or just the illusion of one? He'd beaten countless prisons before, but ADX was different. It wasn't just made of concrete and steel. It was designed to think ahead of him. The Bureau learned from his escapes, and built a system that couldn't be fooled twice. That's why McNair never made another attempt. For once, the prison had outsmarted the man who once outsmarted everyone else. But his presence left a mark. After McNair, the Bureau quietly revised security in nearly every federal facility. New training, new surveillance, and a silent acknowledgement: if one man could outthink a system once, others could try again. Because in prisons like ADX Florence, it's never about if someone will test the system, it's about when. And somewhere deep in those concrete cells, the next man was already watching, already planning, already dreaming of the impossible. It started with a faint scratching sound, almost too soft to notice. But in a place like ADX Florence, every sound matters. Every vibration, every echo through the concrete tells a story. And that night, it told the story of a man who refused to give up. His name was Silva Gonsalves. Inmate number redacted in Bureau reports, but remembered by every guard who worked the D unit that year. He wasn't famous like McNair. He wasn't a terrorist or a cartel boss. He was quiet, disciplined, patient. And that's what made him dangerous. For months, Gonsalves studied the rhythm of ADX. He learned when the lights dimmed, when the guards walked past, when the hum of the security system masked other noises. He paid attention to details no one else noticed: how long it took the air system to shut off during maintenance, which guards lingered during count, which ones rushed through. In a place built to crush the human spirit, Gonsalves turned observation into survival. And then, into strategy. It began with a small piece of metal. A shard from a food tray, filed sharp against the wall until it could slice through plastic. He hid it inside his mattress, under layers of foam that had been stitched and restitched by hand. Each night, while the cameras blinked and the world above slept, he pulled it out and began to work on the vent above his bed. Bit by bit, flake by flake, he carved through steel. For hours, there was only the sound of slow, steady scraping. His muscles ached. His hands bled. But he kept going. Freedom wasn't a dream, it was something he could feel with his fingertips. Days turned to weeks. Weeks into months. The vent grew weaker. Every inch of progress meant risk. One false sound, one misstep, and the control room would flood the cell block with alarms. But Gonsalves was methodical. He wrapped the metal shard with cloth to muffle the sound, and smeared toothpaste on the vent to mask the shine where the steel had been cut. No one noticed. Until one night, February 2009. A new officer took over rounds. He was young, nervous, and slower than the others. When he passed Gonsalves' cell, he paused. Something caught his eye, a thin line of dust on the floor falling from the vent. He stepped closer, shined his flashlight upward, and froze. The vent was nearly open. Behind it, a hollow cavity wide enough for a man to crawl through. It led to the duct system and beyond that toward the service tunnels under the cell block. The alarm roared through the unit. Red lights flashed. Doors sealed. Within seconds the entire facility went into lockdown. Gonsalves was pulled out, handcuffed, and thrown into a restraint chair. He didn't fight. He didn't speak. He just smiled. When investigators searched his cell, they found everything: sharpened metal, cloth rags, even a hand-drawn map of the duct system sketched in pencil on toilet paper. It wasn't a random act. It was months of planning, done in total silence. The Bureau's internal report later admitted what no one wanted to say. The system had been outsmarted. Not defeated but tested, and almost broken. Because if Gonsalves hadn't been caught that night, he might have made it into the tunnels. And from there, no one really knows. After the incident, the Bureau of Prisons initiated a full review of ADX security. Every vent was reinforced with double mesh and tamper-proof bolts. Maintenance crews were escorted by armed guards. And a new rule was added to the manual. No inmate is ever predictable. Ever. But inside those walls, inmates whispered about Silva Gonsalves. Some said he was transferred to another Supermax under a different name. Others claimed he vanished into solitary confinement, never to be seen again. What's certain is this: his story became legend. Proof that even in the most secure prison on earth, someone can still make the system nervous. And in the years that followed, that nervousness turned into paranoia. Cameras multiplied. Sensors were upgraded. Walls were rebuilt. ADX Florence became even colder. Even quieter. Because of one man, and a single piece of metal. In ADX Florence, the war never really stops. It just goes silent. There are no riots. No fights in the yard. No dramatic breakouts splashed across the news. But beneath the silence, something constant brews, a quiet battle between control and resistance. Every single day, men inside those cells test the system. Not with weapons. Not with riots. But with tiny acts of rebellion, precise, patient, invisible. Flooding a cell to short out sensors. Jamming the food slot so the door doesn't close properly. Bending a screw with a spoon handle. These aren't random acts, they're probes. Each one asks the same question: how far can I go before the system notices? To the Bureau of Prisons, ADX is a machine. Every second, a camera blinks, a motion sensor hums, a guard checks a monitor. But to the inmates, that machine has patterns, and patterns can be learned. One former officer once said, even when they can't move, they're still thinking. They watch everything. The sound of a door, the timing of a light. They can map your routine better than you can. Inside, information is power. When an inmate floods his cell, not to escape but to force maintenance inside, he's studying how the staff reacts. When he triggers an alarm by accident, he's not making a mistake, he's measuring the response time. Every action has purpose. Every reaction a clue. In 2011, a small report circulated inside the Bureau, never made public but later leaked in fragments. It described dozens of low-level security incidents at ADX Florence. Almost none were escape attempts, but all were tests. Inmates clogging drainage pipes to see how fast water crews arrived. Taping mirrors to their food slots to study camera blind spots. Faking medical emergencies just to count how many officers responded and from which direction. To the untrained eye, it looked like chaos. To the inmates, it was data. The kind of data that, in the wrong hands, could mean the difference between a locked door and an open one. One former intelligence officer who worked with the Bureau said, ADX isn't just a prison. It's a laboratory for both sides. The staff test new ways to control men. The inmates test new ways to survive them. But there's something even more psychological happening. After years, sometimes decades, in solitary confinement, the human brain begins to turn strategy into obsession. If you can't escape physically, you escape mentally. You look for loopholes, cracks, anything that gives you a sense of control. So an inmate learns to jam his food slot not because he expects to get out, but because for one brief moment he decides when the guard moves. For one moment the system bends around him. And that illusion is the only freedom he'll ever know. Guards call it mental warfare. One officer described walking past a row of cells and hearing nothing. No shouting, no talking, just faint tapping. It wasn't random noise. It was coded communication. Inmates tapping through walls, using a simple alphabet of knocks. The administration banned talking, but they couldn't ban the human need to connect. ADX is designed to break patterns of rebellion. But rebellion finds a way to adapt. When they sealed the air vents to stop communication, inmates began flushing toilets in sequences, their own Morse code through plumbing. When they blocked door slots, prisoners used reflections from small pieces of plastic to flash signals down the hallway. Every time the system tightened control, the inmates grew more creative. It became a chess game. Move for move. Strategy for strategy. And in this game, no one ever truly wins. Because inside ADX Florence, freedom isn't about escaping the walls, it's about beating them even for a second. A cell door that opens half an inch too late. A lock that jams when it shouldn't. A guard who pauses, confused, wondering if the system failed. For the men inside, those moments are victories. The Bureau knows this. They watch. They adapt. Every report, every incident, no matter how small, becomes another line in a file marked behavioral analysis. They learn from the inmates just as the inmates learn from them. And that's what makes ADX different from any other prison on Earth. It isn't just walls and wire, it's a living mind game. Every man inside is trying to outthink the other. A war fought not with guns or knives, but with patience, calculation, and silence. In the end, that's what makes it truly terrifying. Because when silence becomes strategy, even the walls can't rest easy. In a place built to be unbreakable, the only real weakness is human. For all the cameras, the motion sensors, and the layers of concrete thick enough to stop a tank, ADX Florence still runs on people. Guards, cooks, maintenance crews, psychologists, mail clerks. And people, no matter how well trained, can be studied, persuaded, and sometimes corrupted. Inside these walls, inmates have endless time. Time to watch, to listen, to read expressions, to learn what makes a person tick. They notice who hesitates before locking a door, who jokes too much, who looks tired near the end of a shift. They build psychological profiles, the way others build escape plans. Some guards come in strong, armored by procedure. But day after day in that silence, hearing the same doors slam, smelling disinfectant and steel, watching men talk to walls, it wears them down. And that's when the testing begins. It never starts with money. It starts with kindness. A thank you. A quiet conversation through the food slot. A small favor. Could you get me an extra towel? Then a compliment. You treat us fair. Then a request. A letter slipped through the slot. Addressed to no one. At ADX, manipulation is an art form. According to former officers, inmates study staff habits the way predators stalk prey. Slowly, patiently, with intent. One officer might be a father struggling to pay bills. Another, a rookie desperate for respect. The inmates find the cracks, and they press. In 2012, an internal investigation quietly rocked the Bureau. A staff member was caught sneaking contraband into a restricted unit. Nothing dramatic, just cigarettes, candy bars, and a few small pieces of metal. But inside ADX, those items are worth more than gold. They buy influence, loyalty, and silence. The report never made headlines. The Bureau buried it, but the lesson spread fast. No system, no matter how advanced, can outthink desperation. Other incidents followed. Guards trading favors for information. Inmates threatening to expose personal secrets found through gossip or overheard phone calls. In one case, an officer's car was vandalized outside the prison. Rumor said it was a warning. Another time, a maintenance worker was approached at a bar miles away. Offered thousands of dollars to carry out a simple task. Forget to lock a gate. He refused. But others didn't. ADX tightened policies after that. Background checks grew deeper. Psychological screenings became mandatory. Even friendships between staff members and inmates were treated as security risks. The message was clear. Kindness could be dangerous. Still, inmates continued to test. They'd bribe one staffer to pass a message to another. They'd send coded letters through legal mail. Documents too protected to be opened without permission. They used lawyers, family members, and even chaplains as conduits to reach beyond the walls. The Bureau calls it social engineering. The inmates call it strategy. One retired warden once said, "The concrete is the easy part. It's the people that make this place vulnerable." He wasn't exaggerating. In every high-security system, the weakest lock is the human mind. To counter it, ADX launched the Integrity Program. A quiet, internal unit devoted to investigating its own staff. Officers were monitored without warning. Financial records checked. Phone calls reviewed. Some saw it as paranoia. Others saw it as survival. Because at ADX, one small compromise can unravel years of perfection. A missing bolt, A misplaced key. A guard who looks the other way for 5 seconds. That's all it takes for a myth, the myth of escape proof, to crack. The inmates know this. They may never break out. But if they can make the system question itself, they've already won something. Control. And control, even for a moment, is the closest thing to freedom they'll ever feel. Silence. That's the first thing every man remembers about ADX Florence. Not the locks. Not the steel. The silence. It's the kind of quiet that hums inside your skull, louder than any scream. Hour after hour. Day after day. Alone. No voices. No touch. Just the hum of air vents and the echo of your own heartbeat. At first it feels manageable. A challenge. A punishment you can outlast. But slowly something changes. The walls start to move closer. Your thoughts loop in circles. And the mind, desperate for stimulation, begins to invent its own. Some inmates start talking to themselves. Others whisper to invisible people in the walls. One prisoner once said, "After 6 months you start seeing things that aren't there. After a year you start believing them." This is where escape stops being physical and becomes psychological. Humans aren't designed for isolation. Our brains crave connection the way lungs crave air. Take that away and something snaps. Dreams blur into plans. Plans blur into obsession. That's why even men who know there's no way out still draw maps, sketch blueprints, measure the echo of footsteps in the corridor. It's not about hope. It's about staying sane. When every wall tells you never, the mind whispers back, maybe. Psychologists who study Supermax confinement say ADX doesn't just control the body, it rewires the brain. Memory fades. Impulse control weakens. Hallucinations replace reason. But through it all, one instinct survives. The will to escape. Not always to freedom. Sometimes just from the noise in your head. One inmate interviewed under anonymity described it this way. You don't want to run from the prison. You want to run from your own thoughts. So they build imaginary exits. Tunnels drawn in dust. Blueprints traced with soap on the wall. Even conversations with past versions of themselves. The ones who lived before the cage. Every time an officer walks past the door, the fantasy sharpens. What if I distracted him? What if that lock wasn't perfect? It's not rebellion. It's survival disguised as strategy. A report by the Federal Bureau of Prisons quietly admitted that inmates in long-term isolation experience cognitive drift, a gradual unraveling of logic and perception. In that haze, a hairline crack in the wall can look like a doorway to freedom. That's how obsession is born. Not from defiance, but from desperation. Because when your world is a 7 by 12 cell, even the smallest flaw feels like destiny. Guards see it all the time. A man staring at the same screw for hours. Another counting tiles on the floor, whispering numbers like a code. To outsiders it's madness. Inside ADX it's focus. It's the brain's last defense against total collapse. The Bureau tries to manage it. Short therapy sessions through thick glass. Letters censored but never answered. Carefully timed phone calls with family. But nothing replaces touch. Nothing replaces a human face without a uniform. Some inmates eventually break. Screaming through the night. Tearing at their skin. Begging for a sound that isn't their own breathing. Others turn that breaking point into something else. A plan, a pattern, a ritual. They build meaning from routine. Power from patience. And hope from impossibility. That's why the dream of escape never dies at ADX. It mutates. It becomes internal. A place in the mind where the door still opens. Where the sun still burns through the slit window. And where, for one fleeting moment, a man can pretend he's still human. Because in a prison that breaks bodies, the last escape left is inside the mind. Not every escape attempt from ADX Florence made headlines. In fact, most never left the walls. Buried in classified reports and redacted memos, there's a hidden record. A quiet list of men who tried, failed, and vanished into deeper isolation. The Bureau never confirms details publicly. But insiders, officers, investigators, even ex-inmates, whisper the same thing. There were more attempts than the world knows. One report from 2005, marked confidential, eyes only, described an inmate who tried to short-circuit his door lock, using wires stripped from his electric razor. He believed the magnetic system could be disrupted, just long enough to slip out during a shift change. It didn't work. The power surge tripped every alarm in the unit. He was found sitting on the floor, staring at the sparks, as if he'd seen lightning inside a cage. Another attempt came from an inmate who had once worked in mechanical maintenance. Before being transferred to ADX, he memorized the design of the old locking bolts, the timing of the electronic cycles, and tried to replicate the pattern by tapping metal parts in sequence. Guards caught on when they noticed dents forming near his door hinge. He'd spent 6 months studying a rhythm that would never open anything. In 2014, a rumor spread through C-Unit. An inmate had bribed a kitchen worker to smuggle in a small metal plate hidden inside a loaf of bread. The man used it to carve into the wall near his toilet, believing it led to the outer pipe system. After 2 weeks of digging, he hit a layer of reinforced rebar thicker than his arm. The sound carried through the plumbing. Officers arrived in seconds. The bureau never confirmed his name. He disappeared into the control unit, a place beyond solitary, where light stays on 24 hours a day, and silence becomes punishment itself. Each story ends the same way: failure. But every failure makes the system tighten further. Every rumor becomes a lesson. Every attempt a ghost. By 2017, ADX had reinforced nearly every vent, pipe, and duct in the facility. Infrared cameras were added to recreation cages. Heart rate sensors embedded in walls could now detect when someone was moving abnormally. Even the inmate handbooks were rewritten, reminding prisoners that tampering with fixtures could lead to indefinite loss of privileges. Still, the inmates kept thinking, because thinking was the only freedom left. A former warden once said, "ADX Florence isn't escape-proof. It's escape-delayed. We just make sure they run out of time before they run out of hope." For the men inside, that truth cuts deeper than any blade. They don't try because they think they'll win. They try because it's the last way to prove that the system hasn't completely taken their humanity. In the end, no one has ever escaped from ADX Florence. Not once. But that doesn't mean no one's still trying. In mind, in spirit, in silence. Because every night, in the dark corners of those concrete cells, there's still one sound that never truly stops. The faint scrape of metal on stone. The heartbeat of a dream that refuses to die. ADX Florence stands as a monument to control. A fortress built to contain the world's most dangerous men. And yet, its story reveals something deeper. No matter how thick the walls, how advanced the technology, how absolute the silence, you can't cage the human wolf forever. Every man inside has lost everything but one thing: the thought that maybe, somehow, freedom still exists beyond the horizon. That thought, that flicker of rebellion, is stronger than any lock. So when people call ADX escape-proof, they're right, physically. But in spirit? Even the Bureau knows the truth. As long as men can dream, no prison is ever completely secure. If you made it this far, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story. Because behind every concrete wall, there's a reminder of what it really means to be human. To fight, to resist, and to never stop dreaming of the world beyond the bars.